The cold stone of the chapel seemed to leach the very warmth from my bones, but I knew it was a lie. The chill came from within, a frost of the soul that no summer sun could ever thaw. This was my tomb, disguised as an altar. The few faces scattered in the pews were not witnesses to a holy union, but spectators at an execution. My execution. I, Lord Alastair Beaumont, the Earl of Blackwood, soon to be the sole heir to my father's dukedom, stood condemned. At 28 years of age, I had believed the world was mine to command. It had taken less than a fortnight for me to learn that the world, in fact, belonged to my father, the Duke of Harding, and he was a ruler who knew no mercy. My crime? Pride. A foolish, damnable pride that had led me to a misty field at dawn, pistol in hand, opposite a man whose honor I had supposedly besmirched. The lady in question, Lady Annabel, had been nothing more than a passing flirtation, her reputation already as frayed as an old tapestry. But her brother, a hot-headed baronet, saw an opportunity. I was caught in her chambers, a situation far more innocent than it appeared, but scandal is a fire that cares little for the truth. It consumes all in its path. I could have explained. I could have humbled myself. But I was an Earl of Beaumont. We did not explain. We did not kneel. And so, I accepted the duel. No one was harmed. A deliberate shot into the morning air settled the affair, but the damage was done. The story was everywhere. My father, a man for whom legacy and reputation were the only true gods, saw my recklessness as a stain upon our name. His judgment was swift and brutal. No grand tour of the continent. No quiet retreat to a country estate. My punishment was to be marriage. A marriage so beneath my station, it would serve as a public spectacle of my disgrace. I was to be wed to the bastard daughter of Viscount Morley. Morley, a man whose title was as thin as his morals, a sycophant who had slithered through the court for years, looking for any purchase to elevate himself. He had a daughter, it was whispered, an illegitimate child hidden away in the country, a specter of his youthful indiscretions. My father's decree was simple. Marry her, legitimize her with the Beaumont name, and in doing so, prove that I could be humbled. The alternative was disinheritance, complete ruin. So here I stood, a gilded lamb for the slaughter, my eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors at the end of the aisle. Viscount Morley stood near the altar, a vulture in fine silks. He wasn't even trying to hide his satisfaction. His gaze met mine, and a smug, triumphant smirk played on his lips. He was securing a connection to a dukedom, ridding himself of a lifelong shame in one masterful stroke. I was the price, a price he was all too happy to see paid. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of old incense and decay. Then the doors creaked open. She entered, a lone figure draped in a simple white gown that did little to hide the poverty of her station. Her head was bowed, and her face was completely obscured by a thick, plain veil that fell all the way to her waist. She was a ghost, an anonymous vessel for my punishment. She walked alone, no father to give her away, for he was already standing at the altar, counting his gains. As she drew closer, I could hear the whispers from the pews, a cruel hiss of speculation. They weren't wondering about her beauty or her grace, but about the nature of the creature so reviled that she had been hidden from the world until this moment. She stopped beside me, and I could feel a tremor in her small frame. Or perhaps it was my own shaking I felt. I refused to look at her, keeping my gaze fixed on the stained glass window behind the priest, its colors muted by a century of grime. The priest began to write, his voice a droning monotone that washed over me. The words were meaningless. Vows of love and honor felt like a perverse mockery. My own honor had led me here, to this sham, this desecration of all I held sacred. I spoke my lines when prompted, my voice a hollow echo in the cavernous silence. I heard her voice for the first time when she spoke hers. It was soft, barely a whisper, but clear, without the tremble I had expected. There was a strange sort of resolve in it that pricked at the edges of my fury. Then came the moment. The priest, with a somber nod, instructed, "You may lift the veil." I turned to her. This was it, the final act of my humiliation. My hand was unsteady as I reached for the edge of the fabric. I expected to find a plain face, perhaps mousy and forgettable, the kind of woman easily ignored, easily hidden. I was not prepared for the truth. I lifted the veil. She raised her head slowly, her eyes, a startling shade of green, meeting mine for the first time. But it was not her eyes that held my gaze. It was the scar, a brutal, jagged line that cut from the edge of her left eyebrow, down across the bridge of her nose, and ended just beside her lips. It was not a faint, silvery mark of some childhood accident. It was a deep, puckered ravine in her skin, a violent testament to some past horror that twisted her features, pulling one side of her mouth into a permanent, sorrowful grimace. A gasp went through the pews. I felt the blood drain from my face. My carefully constructed wall of cold fury shattered, replaced by a wave of pure, visceral horror. This was not a punishment. This was a curse. I was being shackled to a monster. The Viscount's triumphant smirk now seemed utterly demonic. He had not simply married off his bastard. He had unleashed her upon me. I felt a dizzying sickness rise in my throat. My life, as I knew it, was over. I was shackled to a specter, a secret hidden by society. If you've ever felt trapped by a fate you didn't choose, Let me know in the comments below, and please tell me where in the world you are watching from. Your support gives me the strength to tell this story. The priest cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding, and declared us man and wife. He bid me to kiss my bride. I couldn't move. I could only stare at the disfigurement that would now share my name, my home, my life. Every hope I had for the future crumbled into dust in that single, horrifying moment. Her green eyes, so full of a life that seemed impossible given the ruin of her face, did not waver. She simply watched me, her expression unreadable, as if she were waiting for a verdict that had been delivered long ago. Finally, forcing my limbs to obey, I leaned forward and brushed my lips against her unscarred cheek. It was like kissing coal marble. The ceremony was over. My damnation had officially begun. There was no reception, no feast, no pretense of celebration. We left the chapel through a side door, avoiding the judgmental eyes of the few who had bothered to attend. A carriage was waiting, stark and black, the crest of my family painted on the door, a fresh, bleeding wound on my pride. The journey to my northern estate, Blackwood Manor, was to be a 2-day affair. 2 days trapped in a confined space with the woman who was now my wife. I stared out the window, watching the gray, dreary landscape of the Midlands roll by, determined to pretend she wasn't there. Silence was my only weapon, my only shield against the reality of my situation. I expected tears, perhaps a desperate attempt at conversation, a plea for kindness. I received none. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the world outside her own window. She did not look at me once. It was an unnerving, resolute stillness that was far more unsettling than any emotional outburst would have been. We stopped overnight at a coaching inn. I had the innkeeper prepare 2 separate rooms, a command that earned me a knowing, pitying look. I took my meal alone in my room, the food tasteless in my mouth. I found myself listening for any sound from her room next door, a sob, a footstep, anything to betray the fact that she was a living, breathing person and not some silent automaton sent to torment me. I heard nothing. The silence from her was as profound and deep as my own, yet while mine was a fortress of anger, hers felt like something else entirely. It felt like patience. The thought was so absurd, so infuriating, that I threw my wine glass against the hearth, the shattering sound a brief, satisfying release in the crushing quiet. We arrived at Blackwood Manor on the 2nd day, as dusk was painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The house loomed before us, a great beast of gray stone and black slate, its many windows like vacant eyes. It had been my family's hunting lodge for generations, a place of boisterous, masculine escape. Now it was to be my prison. The staff, led by my stoic housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, were assembled in the great hall. Their faces were a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. I saw their eyes flicker to my wife's face, saw the subtle, quickly hidden winces. "This is Lady Beaumont," I announced, my voice flat and cold. "She will be the mistress of this house. Her chambers will be in the east wing. Mine will remain in the west." The meaning was clear. We were to be separated by the entire breadth of the manor. She will require a lady's maid. See to it. Without another glance at her, I turned and strode toward the west wing, my sanctuary. The first weeks were a silent, undeclared war. I established a routine built entirely around avoidance. I took my breakfast in my study, rode out for hours on end, and had my dinner served late, long after I presumed she had retired. I gave Mrs. Gable my instructions. My wife was to be given anything she required, but her presence was not to intrude upon my own. In essence, I was attempting to make her a ghost in her own home, but she refused to be exorcised. I would catch glimpses of her, a flash of her dress disappearing down a long corridor, her silhouette in the distant walled garden, a light in the window of the library late at night. The library, a place I had not set foot in since I was a boy. It was a dusty tomb of forgotten knowledge, yet it seemed she had claimed it as her own. Her quiet persistence began to fray my nerves. She was a constant, silent reproach. I found myself growing angry at the smallest things. The scent of lavender that now seemed to cling to the hallways, the sound of a pianoforte being played softly in the afternoons, a sound that had not been heard in Blackwood for decades. It was her, always her, gentle invasion of my solitude. One afternoon, my temper finally boiled over. A young maid, new to the house, tripped while serving my tea, spilling it across a stack of important estate papers. I rose to my feet, my voice a whip-crack of fury. "You clumsy fool! Get out of my sight! Tell Mrs. Gable you are dismissed." The girl burst into tears, her face pale with terror. It was merely an accident. The voice came from the doorway of the study. I turned, startled. It was her, Hilara. She stood there, her expression calm, though I could see a tightness around her unscarred eye. She stepped into the room, addressing not me, but the terrified maid. "Go and fetch a dry cloth, Mary. These things happen. The Earl is merely frustrated with his work." Her tone was so measured, so full of quiet authority, that the girl stopped crying, gave a quick curtsy, and scurried from the room. My wife then turned her gaze on me. "She is a good girl, and her family depends on her wages. Your papers are parchment. They will not suffer for a bit of tea." I was speechless, caught off guard by her directness. It was the first time she had initiated any contact, the first time she had challenged me. "You forget your place, madam," I said, my voice low and menacing. "I'm the master of this house." And a master should be just, she replied, her gaze unwavering, not cruel. She held my eyes for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between us, before she turned and left the study as quietly as she had entered. I was left standing there, my anger deflating, replaced by a strange, unsettling feeling. It was not admiration, not yet, but it was a grudging respect. She had not been afraid of me. That evening, I did something different. I went to the library. She was there, as I knew she would be, sitting in a worn armchair by the fire, a heavy book open in her lap. The room, once so neglected, was transformed. The shelves were dusted, the books organized, and the fire cast a warm, inviting glow over everything. She looked up as I entered, her expression betraying a flicker of surprise before settling back into its usual placid mask. I walked over to the fireplace, leaning against the mantel, a calculated distance between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the logs. I had come here to reassert my authority, to put her back in her place, but the words I had planned now seemed childish and petty. Instead, a different, darker impulse took over, a need to see her crack, to prove she was as damaged inside as she was out. "Does it pain you?" I asked, the words emerging colder than I intended. She did not pretend to misunderstand. She simply marked her page in her book and closed it gently. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice even. "Your face," I said, the word hanging in the air between us, ugly and sharp. "The scar. Is it a constant pain?" She looked at me, her green eyes holding no trace of the hurt or anger I had expected. It was a calm, appraising look, as if I were a curious child who had asked a tactless question. She placed her closed book on the small table beside her chair before she answered, a deliberate, thoughtful motion. "It has not pained me for many years," she said, her voice soft but steady. "At first, it was a fire on my skin. Now, it is simply a map of a journey I survived. It does not define me, my lord. It only reminds me that I can endure." She paused, her gaze never leaving mine. "Does my presence pain you? Is it constant torment?" The question was not an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry, delivered with the same disarming calm. She had taken my cruel weapon, turned it in her hand, and offered it back to me, not as a threat, but as an observation. I had no answer. For the second time that day, I was rendered speechless by this woman. I, who had debated with wits in London and commanded men on my estates, was silenced by a scarred bastard who refused to play her part. I felt a flush of shame, hot and unfamiliar. I had tried to wound her, and had only succeeded in exposing my own vulgarity. Without another word, I turned and left the library, the warmth of the fire feeling like a judgment against my own cold heart. That night, sleep did not come easily. Her words echoed in my mind. A map of a journey I survived. It was a perspective I could not comprehend. I saw only ruin. She saw survival. I saw ugliness. She saw a story. From that day forward, something within me shifted. My campaign of deliberate ignorance was abandoned, replaced by a new, covert mission, observation. I became a spy in my own home. I no longer changed my schedule to avoid her. Instead, I engineered opportunities to watch her when she thought she was unobserved. I saw her with Mrs. Gable, going over the household ledgers. The housekeeper, a woman who had served my family for 40 years and feared no one, was listening intently as Alara pointed out discrepancies with a sharp, logical mind, suggesting efficiencies my own estate manager had overlooked for years. There was no arrogance in her, only a quiet competence that left Mrs. Gable nodding in clear admiration. A few days later, the local vicar, Mr. Abernathy, came to call. He was an elderly, scholarly man whom I had always found rather dull. I was in my study, the door slightly ajar, and I heard their voices from the drawing room. I expected a strained conversation of pleasantries. Instead, I heard Alara discussing Roman history with him, debating the causes of the empire's fall with a knowledge that was as surprising as it was profound. Abernathy was enthralled. "My dear lady," he said, his voice full of delight, "your father, the Viscount, told me you were delicate. He failed to mention you were brilliant." I heard Alara's soft laugh, a sound I had never heard before. "My father and I, sir, have rarely discussed the state of my mind." The comment was delivered without a trace of bitterness, yet it painted a clearer picture of her past than any tearful confession ever could. My curiosity deepened into a kind of obsession. I found myself searching for the source of her strength, for the secret of her unshakable composure. The answer, a suspected, lay in the library. One night, after I was sure she had retired to her wing, I went there myself. The room had become her sanctuary, and evidence of her was everywhere. A shawl draped over her favorite chair, a wildflower pressed between the pages of a book of poetry. On a small writing desk in the corner, I found a leather-bound portfolio. My hand hesitated for a moment, feeling like a trespasser, but my need to understand was too strong. I opened it. Inside were dozens of sketches, rendered in charcoal and ink with breathtaking skill. They were not grand landscapes or formal portraits. They were small, intimate studies of the world around her. The intricate pattern of frost on a window pane, the weary face of an old stable hand, the delicate anatomy of a fallen bird's wing. She saw the world with a clarity and an attention to detail that I, who had prided myself on my keen eye, had never possessed. She found beauty in the imperfect, the overlooked, and the forgotten. I closed the portfolio, a profound sense of my own blindness washing over me. Winter arrived with a vengeance not long after, blanketing the world in a thick shroud of white. The north wind howled around the corners of the manor, a mournful, relentless cry. For 3 days, we were completely snowed in, prisoners of the weather. The enforced proximity shattered the last remnants of our separate routines. We took our meals together in the main dining hall, the long table between us a vast, empty expanse. The silence was no longer hostile, but it was awkward, filled with the unspoken weight of all my past cruelties. On the third night of the storm, a sound like a cannon shot echoed through the house. A moment later, a frantic footman burst into the dining hall. "My lord, the chimney stack on the east wing. The wind has taken it. It's collapsed through the library roof." I was on my feet instantly, a surge of adrenaline cutting through my stupor. But as I turned, I saw Alara was already ahead of me, her face pale, but her expression determined. We ran together towards the east wing. The scene in the library was one of chaos. A huge section of the ceiling had given way, and a torrent of snow and freezing rain was pouring onto the priceless collection of books below. The staff was standing by, frozen with indecision. It was Alara who took command. "Thomas, Richard, get the oilcloth from the stables, all of them. Mary, Mrs. Gable, we need to move the books from this side of the room. Now." Her voice was sharp, clear, and full of an authority no one dared question. I found myself following her lead, hauling heavy oak shelves away from the deluge, my muscles straining. We worked for hours, a frantic, desperate team, side by side in the swirling snow and dust. Her dress was ruined, her face smudged with soot, but her energy was boundless. She was everywhere, directing, encouraging, and working harder than anyone. Finally, the last of the threatened books were moved to safety, and the gaping hole was covered with tarpaulins. We stood in a wrecked, freezing room, exhausted, soaked, and breathing heavily. I looked at her. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and there was a long streak of grime on her unscarred cheek. In the flickering lantern light, she did not look like a monster or a specter. She looked like a warrior. And in that moment, for the first time, I didn't see the scar. I saw her. A flicker of warmth in the desolate winter of my life. If this story has touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss how our journey unfolds. A small, weary smile touched her lips as she surveyed our work. "Well," she said, her voice raspy with exhaustion, "I suppose the room will be much brighter now." For the first time, I smiled back. A real, genuine smile. And the ice that had encased my heart for so long began to crack. That small smile, so rare and precious, became the focus of my world. The storm had broken more than just our roof. It had broken the spell of silence and animosity that had defined our existence. In the days that followed, the wrecked library became our shared territory. We spent hours there, working with the staff to salvage what we could, but often, long after the others had left, we would remain, sorting through dusty tomes by the light of a single lantern. It was in these quiet moments that we truly began to speak. I learned that her mother had been a governess, a woman of great learning but no fortune, who had died when Alara was just a child. She had been raised in a small, isolated cottage on the edge of her father's estate, with only an elderly woman for company and books for friends. She never spoke of her father, the Viscount, and I learned not to ask. In return, I found myself telling her things I had never spoken of to anyone, of the immense, crushing weight of my father's expectations, of the loneliness that came with the title, of the feeling that my life was a performance for the benefit of others. She listened, her strange, beautiful green eyes full of an empathy I had never known. She did not offer pity, but something far more valuable, understanding. "It seems we were both raised in cages, my lord," she said one evening, her voice thoughtful. "Yours was simply gilded." The observation was so astute, so true, that it left me breathless. She saw me not as an earl, not as her captor, but as another soul who had been confined. The distance between us, once a vast chasm, was shrinking with every shared word, every quiet look. I began to notice things I'd been blind to before. The way a genuine smile, a rare and wonderful event, made her whole face light up, transforming the map of her scar into something almost beautiful. The intelligence in her hands as she skillfully repaired the torn pages of a book. The fierce loyalty she inspired in the staff, who now looked at her with open affection. My feelings were a confusing tangle of respect, admiration, and a burgeoning tenderness that terrified me. I, who had once felt revulsion at the sight of her, now found myself seeking her out, craving her company. I would bring her curiosities for my rides, an eagle's feather, a strangely shaped river stone, a winter rose from the sheltered corner of the greenhouse, just to see that flicker of pleasure in her eyes. One afternoon, as we both reached for the same fallen book, our hands brushed. A jolt, like lightning, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if burned, my heart hammering in my chest. She looked up at me, her cheeks flushed, and in that moment, I knew I was lost. The feelings I had for her were no longer something I could analyze or ignore. I was falling in love with my wife. This new reality was put to the test when, with the roads finally clear, we received our first visitors, a neighboring baron and his wife, Sir John and Lady Ashworth. They were insufferable gossips, their minds as narrow as their country lanes. They came sniffing for scandal, and they found it in Alara. Lady Ashworth looked at my wife's face with a poorly concealed expression of horror, and spent the entire visit directing her conversation exclusively at me, as if Alara were a piece of unfortunate furniture. The final straw came as they were preparing to leave. "It is so brave of you, Lord Beaumont," Lady Ashworth said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "To take on such a burden. One must do one's duty, I suppose, no matter how unpleasant." Before, I would have let the comment pass, my own shame silencing me. But now a cold, protective fury rose within me. I drew myself up to my full height, letting the aristocratic chill I had once used as a weapon fall upon her. "I believe you are mistaken, Lady Ashworth," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "My wife is the greatest blessing of my life. Her character, her intelligence, and her beauty outshine any woman in this county. I'm the one who is fortunate in this union, not her. It is a pity that you lack the perception to see it." I then turned to Alara, took her hand in mine, and brought it to my lips, my eyes never leaving the stunned faces of our guests. "My dear, shall we return to our books? I find the company in the library far more stimulating." The Ashworths departed in a flustered, indignant hurry. As the door closed behind them, Alara looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. I simply squeezed her hand, the words, "I love you," resting on the tip of my tongue, a truth so powerful I was not yet brave enough to speak it. We existed in a fragile, perfect bubble for the next few weeks. Spring had come to the north. The gardens began to bloom under Alara's patient care, and the manor, once my prison, felt like a true home. My love for her was no longer a confusing secret, but a simple, undeniable fact of my existence. I was merely waiting for the right moment to tell her, to cast off the last shadow of our beginning. But the past has a way of returning when it is least welcome. He arrived on a bright May afternoon, his carriage rolling up the drive with an air of arrogant ownership. I saw him from my study window, and my blood ran cold. It was Viscount Morley. He strode into the great hall as if he owned it, his eyes sweeping over the improvements with a greedy glint. He was dressed in the height of London fashion, reeking of perfume and self-satisfaction. "Alistair," he boomed, using my given name with a familiarity that set my teeth on edge. I was in the area and thought I would call upon my favorite son-in-law and see how my dear daughter is settling in. He smirked, the same vile expression I remembered from the wedding. He was not here for a social call. He was here for something else. Alara entered the hall then, drawn by the noise. When she saw her father, all the color drained from her face. The quiet confidence she had cultivated over the past months vanished, replaced by the look of a frightened, cornered animal. It was a look I never wanted to see on her face again. "Father," she said, her voice barely audible. "Ah, there she is," the Viscount said, his gaze raking over her with open disdain. He then turned to me. "Well, my lord, I have fulfilled my part of the bargain. I delivered you a wife and solved your little problem with the Duke. Your reputation is salvaged, your inheritance secure. Now I find myself in a bit of a temporary financial embarrassment. I'll come to collect on your gratitude. A man in your position certainly understands that such favors, they require a certain reciprocation." His meaning was unmistakable. He was here to blackmail me. I looked from the Viscount's greedy, smiling face to Alara's, which was as pale and still as a marble statue. The fear in her eyes was a dagger in my heart, but beneath it, I saw something else, resignation. She expected this. She had lived her entire life under the heel of this man's cruelty. She expected me to pay him, to treat her as the transaction he believed her to be. The man I was 6 months ago would have done just that. He would have paid the price to avoid a scene, to quiet the scandal, cursing her under his breath for the inconvenience. But I was not that man anymore. I felt a profound, clarifying calm settle over me. I finally understood what true honor was. It was not avoiding scandal or preserving a title. It was defending the person you love. I let go of Alara's hand and took a step forward, placing myself between her and her father. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Viscount," I said, my voice dangerously level. "You did not solve my problems. You exploited them. You used your own daughter as a pawn in your pathetic attempt to claw your way into relevance. You delivered nothing to me but your shame, a shame you were too cowardly to bear yourself." The Viscount's smirk faltered, replaced by a sneer. "Insolent boy, you forget your position. A word from me in London about the state of your unconventional marriage." "Say what you will," I interrupted, cutting him off sharply. "My father, the Duke, knows the truth of your character. He used you, just as you used your daughter. You are a tool that has outlived its usefulness. You have no power here." My words struck home. His face flushed with rage. Seeing his leverage evaporating, he turned his venom on the only person he had ever been able to hurt without consequence. "You think you've won, don't you?" He spat at Alara, who flinched as if struck. "You with that hideous face. Do you even know how you got that mark? It was your own vanity. Climbing a trellis to reach a bird's nest after you were told not to. I warned you it would break." He laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You were always a disobedient, worthless creature. I should have let you perish then." And in that monstrous confession, in his casual admission of neglect, The last vestiges of my old self burned away, leaving only a white-hot, protective love. I looked at Alara, at her face, the map of a journey she had survived, and I was overwhelmed with an adoration so fierce it felt as if it could shatter stone. I turned back to the Viscount, and he shrank back from the look in my eyes. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking with a controlled fury. "How dare you," he began. "Get out," I roared, the sound echoing through the great hall. The staff, who had been watching from the doorways, straightened up, their expressions hard. "You are no longer welcome in this house, or in our lives. You will not write, you will not call, you will not speak my wife's name again. She is a Beaumont now. She is the lady of this house, and she is worth more in her little finger than you are in your entirety. You speak of her face, but you are the monster here. You see, you look at her and see a flaw, a burden. When I look at my wife," I said, my voice softening as I turned to her, "I see strength. I see courage. I see a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart. I see a beauty so profound that it makes every other woman I have ever met seem like a pale imitation. I was a broken man when I came to this house, morally, a hollow shell of pride and arrogance. And this woman," I said, walking to Alara and taking her trembling hands in mine, "this incredible woman whom you threw away has saved me. She has taught me what it means to be a man. She is not my condemnation. She is my salvation." I looked directly into Alara's eyes, my heart bare for her to see. "I love you," I whispered, the words finally spoken, full of all the truth and adoration I felt. "With all that I am, I love you." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, and for the first time, it was a tear of joy. Her lips trembled into a real, radiant smile. She squeezed my hands, her strength flowing back into her. "And I love you, Alistair," she replied, her voice clear and strong. I turned back to the Viscount one last time. His face was a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He was defeated, and he knew it. "Now," I said, my voice like ice. "For the last time, leave." Without another word, he turned and scurried out of the hall, a pathetic, diminished man fleeing the light he could not bear. As the great oak door slammed shut behind him, a profound silence fell. It was the silence of freedom. I pulled Alara into my arms, and she buried her face in my chest, her body shaking with released tension. I held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair in my home. The last shadow was gone. Our life, our real life, was just beginning. 2 years later, the laughter of a child echoed in the gardens of Blackwood Manor. Our son, James, a boy with my dark hair and his mother's brilliant green eyes, chased butterflies through the flower beds that Alara had brought back to glorious life. The manor was no longer a place of exile, but a home filled with light, warmth, and love. My father, the Duke, had visited once. He had been formal and stiff, but as he watched Alara patiently showing our son the colors of a rose, I saw a look of grudging respect in his eyes. He had meant to punish his son, but he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life. My condemnation had become my redemption. I learned that the world's judgment is a fickle and meaningless thing. True value, true beauty, is not found in a flawless face or an ancient title, but in a resilient spirit and a courageous heart. I was told I was condemned to marry the bastard daughter of the Viscount, but when she lifted her veil at the altar, she did not reveal a monster. She revealed my future, my purpose, my everything. She saved me from a prison of my own making and showed me what it truly means to be free. To follow more stories of love conquering adversity, make sure you subscribe to the channel.